Discussions. And tonight we're going to tackle some topics of myths versus science, superpowers versus struggles. Where are they? What do they mean? And get some interaction from some of the viewers as well to kind of talk this piece through. And just to remind people from the background perspective, Stephen and I both have dyslexia. Stephen's got remediated at age 45, and mine got prevention around age 5. So we come from different perspectives of the struggle, but I also raised 2 kids with dyslexia, and they got remediated. So it's a personal perspective, part of a personal conversation tonight, but also let's go to the research, because many of the amounts of misinformation come more from personal opinions that actually are not backed up by scientific studies. And it's not that we don't have the studies, it's that people are choosing just not to mention them because their personal view doesn't match the research. And we want to be sure the audience knows the difference between true evidence-based or empirically studied and proven information and information that's personal opinion. So, Stephen, good to see you tonight. What are your thoughts as we jump into this topic about, dyslexia strengths, dyslexia myths, and the science behind them?
So, this topic comes up all the time. And when we're looking at this, it's a lot of people look at coincidences, or there's a lot of people that the typical thing is about dyslexia. Somebody who has dyslexia is they're likely to be an entrepreneur. They're good at sports. They're good at arts. They're good at all these other things, except for the one thing that the education system is asking them to do more and more, which now I would say pretty much in every class that they have, they're asked to read and spell.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of coincidences, or there's a lot of commonality in a lot of the strengths or superpowers that people say that dyslexics have, or the I think the term now is dyslexic traits.
Mm-hmm. Or one group calls it dyslexic thinking. Another group calls it the dyslexic mind.
And I know this will probably surprise a lot of people. Are they wrong? Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a caveat to that.
Yeah.
So I like to say we develop these other skills. We hone these other skills, much like the arts, the sports, the outside of the box thinking, out of necessity, out of survival.
Yeah.
Right. So we're put in, from a young age, we're put in an environment, i.e. school, and asked to perform in ways that we, at that point in time, without remediation, physically cannot do.
Right. Which is the reading skills.
Spelling
skills, the paragraph writing, essay writing. Those are really challenging, difficult skills for anybody with dyslexia.
Well, even far before even reading starts, right? So they get into kindergarten and, they're bombarded with A says ah.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an apple. A says ah. Here's an apple. And, what we're and I'm going to simplify this down to Stephen terms.
Right.
What we're doing is we're not teaching them to think, to process, any of that. All we're doing is teaching them how to memorize. This shape, the letter A, says this sound, and you associate this shape with this sound with an apple. Right. And getting people to understand that for dyslexics, that is so harmful. So what do we do as dyslexics, starting from a very young age? Well, let me ask you this question. Let me ask it like this. In school, was there a particular subject and or activity that you were required to do that you were just horrible at, that you dreaded going to that class? I asked this question to a reporter one time who made the comment of, I just can't understand anybody that doesn't love to read.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him that question. And he goes, oh, I was really heavy in school. And I hated PE and hated to run.
Right.
I said, welcome to dyslexia. I said, now think about it like this. What if in every class that you went to, the first thing that you had to do before you ever got to participate was run a mile?
Mm-hmm.
How, I said, now thinking about it from that lens, what would your perspective or your outlook for school be? Because I would hate it. Welcome to my world.
Right. Because reading is a key element in every class. So one inherent piece that you're bringing up from the science perspective is we can downplay somebody's struggle in reading, but it doesn't mean they're going to be able to compete at their full potential because so many subjects require reading. Now, people can say, well, let's bring in compensatory tools. Let's bring in scanning pens and audio books and, screen readers. And that's great. Those are compensatory tools. But what if we could do more than that? What if you can actually take weaker skills and make them stronger? And then you actually have the chance to give the person a higher, more proficient degree of ability to perform and not be hindered by this obstacle of reading. But let's go back one step lower to say, okay, there's 6 things we put in the description of this podcast that some groups say all dyslexics have these 6 elements. Now, I don't know of any large-scale studies that back this, so this is more a group's personal opinion of what they think is prominent in the majority of people with dyslexia. They have backed down a little bit, and they're not saying everybody has it, but they're saying most all dyslexics have these 6 skills. They're able to visualize and kind of picture content in their head. They're better able to imagine what's going on, and just kind of think of things about this. They're better at communicating and explaining stuff verbally. They're better at reasoning. They're better at connecting with other people, and they're better at exploring and kind of problem solving, thinking through things. So, but let's back up from those 6 and say, okay, but the brain has certain systems. There's a language system, there's a motor system, there's a memory system. And so if you can't read, or you don't read well, or it's really effortful for you, but you're in a classroom situation where you have to learn the content, what are you going to do? Well, most people are going to try to learn as much as possible, listening to the person talking, listening to the lecture, and trying to hold on to, understand, and remember that content, knowing that they're not going to go read the chapter, later on. And Stephen, how's that true for you? Did you read the book chapters in school?
My teachers were amazed that they received the books back in the exact condition that they gave it to me at the end of the year, because they got stuck in my locker and that's where they stayed.
They were just thought you were really tidy and took amazing care of your books.
If it was a brand new book, I may have opened it,
right?
But yeah, no. So let's go back to. I really like that that list of. Can we bring that back up real quick?
Yep.
Because earlier I said we hone these skills. And I like to call them. We're not looking at strategies or anything like that. We're looking at survival skills. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So what I don't think is fair or genuine when we're looking at these these list of 6, and there's more, but we'll take these 6. I don't think it's fair or genuine to take what an adult dyslexic, the skills that they've built to survive and how they did it, and put those onto a child in school. Right. So when we look at visualizing and imagination, well, imagination, I actually had this conversation yesterday about imagination, and I'll get your opinion on this too. I believe part of the issues with imagination is due to where we're having a larger issue with kids that can't visualize and or imagine what they're hearing as far as reading goes.
Right.
When you and I were young, we didn't have instant videos or instant data being pushed at us through video or audio. We had to imagine. When we went out and played, we played with our little army men or our cars or whatever. We imagined then. So we didn't even realize that we were building that skill that far back.
Yeah, it's imagination through play, imagination through activities on the recess, out in activities in sports, activities in gym class. There's lots of motor-based creativity and play that is also involving imagery, because you're kind of picturing, hey, I saw this kid climb that jungle gym, and you're 7, and you've never done that before, but you watch them first, like, okay, I think I can do that, and you're kind of picturing in your mind how you're going to go hand over hand, or you're going to go hand, whatever it's going to be. You're kind of imagining how you're going to do that, and you're attempting it up, and then hopefully you figured out, okay, and then how do I get down? So there's early imagination skills that come from the sensory motor system, and OTs have a specific name for that. They call that ideation. Can you come up with the idea? Can you see it? Can you visualize it of how you're going to coordinate your body to do an activity?
So that's a great question to ask to debunk that myth.
Yeah.
Can we watch somebody else do it and then either repeat what they're doing and or make it better? I would say a lot of us, yes. Right?
Yeah.
But if we went and said, hey, Dr. Conway, I want you to, go out there and pull the engine out of this car and rebuild it.
Yeah. And
you've never even turned a wrench.
Right. Which is pretty close to true.
Which you're going to be like, yeah, I don't even know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if we're going to say that they have this imagination and they have this visualization that is so inherited that because of dyslexia, it's so much better than anybody else's.
Right.
We would then be able to say, well, then I could hand you a problem that you have no other knowledge about, and you should be able to figure it out and do it, which I would say they can't.
Yeah. We
can't most of the time.
Well, and it's interesting, because there's some physicians who talk about and say, well, they have different structures of the brain. We've looked at the brain of dyslexics and the brain of people who don't have dyslexia, and we see some different folds of the different sizes of different parts of the brain. But my response as a neuropsychologist who's trained in neurorehabilitation, I'm published in neuroimaging, I've done those neuroimaging studies, is, but if you have 2 people who have different strengths, why would you expect the brain anatomy to look the same? Because it's not. If you're practicing, your name is Wynton Marsalis, and you're practicing trumpet playing to a, professional level of a, professional performer in trumpet, then you're going to have a bigger network of the brain for finger control than somebody who doesn't play the trumpet. That's not genetically pre-endowed. That's what we call experience-dependent neuroplasticity. And that means the neural wiring of the brain is dependent upon what you do, what you practice, how much intensity you practice it, how much frequency you practice, which means how much time per day and how many days per week. And if Wynton Marsalis is practicing that trumpet 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and he started when he's 5 and now he's 35, he has built some different structural wiring because of the practice. It wasn't genetically placed there. So yes, many dyslexics have really strong skills, but there's no study that proves that they were giving them by their genetics. It's more likely that it's the typical brain development is as they practice them, those skills built over time. And that's phenomenal because it helps raise one really key fundamental question. If your brain could build imagery skills, and if it really built, let's say all those 6 are correct, your brain built imagery skills, and it built visualizing skills and communicating skills and reasoning skills, and you built connecting skills and exploring skills, then why would you think it can't build reading skills? It built all those others. And the question is, well, how did it build those others? It built them with very systematic, very structured, high intensity practice. And
so what would you call, you get a patient coming in, and I know you've done a lot of research in this area, but you have a patient that comes in that cannot gain those new skills because of whatever reason. What would you normally call that from a neuroscientist point of view?
If it's developmental,
I said they just can't. They can't. At this point, they can't learn anything new, or they can't build that skill. They can't. I mean, no matter how much remediation, no matter how any of that, I would say we call that brain damage.
Yeah, and with brain damage, there's 3 roots that you have. You have vicariation, you have restitution, and you have I just lost the third term. Compensatory. So vicariation, which means you go a different route to do the same skill. Restitution means you're able to restore that same ability with different wiring, but you're actually doing it the same way. Whereas vicariation, you're finding a workaround. And then compensatory is you can't get a workaround, you can't rewire it, so you're doing other things to try to accomplish that same outcome, but it's not the same as what those first 2 were. And those are kind of the neurorehabilitation approaches to rebuilding brain function. But in our studies of brain damage that caused reading problems, which is called phonological alexia, we showed that 70% of people who have had brain damage, called stroke, it cut off the blood supply in the arteries, part of the brain tissue is gone, it liquefies actually, and can't grow it back. But the brain wiring, it's the white matter, is really the intelligence of the brain. And so the brain wiring is always capable of being built more. You could build new brain wiring at any time of life for as long as you live if the practice is the right intensity, the right frequency, and it starts at basic skills, moves to advanced skills. And there's about 6 elements that actually help the brain build new wiring. So we showed in one study that even when the damage on the left side was so big that the language cortex was pretty much gone back here, there was no more language cortex. You were actually able to rewire the right side of the brain to take on the reading skills that used to be done by the left. Because you've got 100 billion brain cells in the typical human brain, and the estimate is about 100 trillion connections. It's estimated that one brain neuron, one of those 100 billion, can be involved in up to 40,000 different network connections. So you have this amazing learning organ that needs you to give it the right instruction with the right practice, with the right intensity, and then it's got the best chance to build the skills. And that's true of anybody, whether you have dyslexia, even if you have Down syndrome, if you have a language disorder, if you have autism, all human brains have the capacity to make new connections and new wiring. So the question is what are we doing?
Well, so that's also another myth or misconception that's out there, is that our brain is hardwired.
Yes.
And you typically will never become an avid reader or be able to spell.
Right.
So just listening to what you just said, if we can build new skills and we can build new connections, wiring. And we can do that up until we pass away. Well, then that debunks that whole piece of it also. The next one was pretty, to me, it's funny, but communication.
Yeah.
So I would ask, how do you learn to communicate? Well, you learn to communicate through listening and hearing a lot of talking, but you also learn that communication, the vocabulary, through reading and experience. So you just don't come out of you're not just born with this higher capacity for communication and or language. That doesn't make any sense. You haven't been taught anything. You haven't been taught any of these communication or these words to communicate. I would actually argue that one of their deficits is communication because they have less vocabulary and they don't have the ability to go find what words they want to say and communicate. Now, there's a caveat to that. Obviously, if you speak to your kids a lot,
Yeah.
and they're constantly in communication with you, and you're always talking, well, obviously, those kids tend to have a bigger vocabulary, so they're able to speak better.
Yeah.
I mean, like our oldest son was always involved in around all the adults that were around, us, and was always in the conversations. So with that being said, yes, they can tend to have that, but I think that list really is built off of adults' experience now. But we're not talking about adults. Typically we're talking about children and their skills.
Right. And I think one thing that can be helpful for folks to think about as well is understanding that when we look at fMRI of the brain of somebody who's struggling to learn how to read, yes, you see a different profile of activity than somebody who's not struggling to read. But again, the same question comes up. Well, why would you expect it to be the same? They don't have the same skills. This child can read easily, they can fluently read, they can sound out words, which means they have wiring that they've built over time because the brain didn't struggle to build those phonological skills, those decoding skills, those spelling skills. But the other child's brain has struggled to build those skills and they haven't built them. They're 1, 2, or 5 grade levels behind in reading or spelling and writing. And so we shouldn't expect the brain activity to be the same because they don't have the same skills. So the hallmark profile that groups have shown in fMRI research studies is the left hemisphere of somebody who's a strong reader has a lot of activity right here just above this ear area that they call the language cortex. So it's the temporal lobe, part of the frontal, part of the occipital. It's that language cortex together. The child who's struggling to read and struggling to sound words out and has had tons of phonics, but it hasn't, quote, clicked yet. They show more activity on the right side of the brain, and their performance on reading tests are low. So they're actually not reading quite as well. But then that raises the question of, well, can the child with dyslexia not learn those reading skills? And we have 2 big sources of evidence. We have multiple peer-reviewed, randomized controlled trial and small empirical studies showing that we can successfully take kids from the 5th percentile in reading and raise their skills to the average range. So time and time again, research has shown the person with dyslexia, whether you're 5 or 25, can be rewired, retrained, and build those reading skills. Now, one group in 2002 did a study of it, and what they found was before treatment, the dyslexic kids had more activity on the right, but after treatment, when they had changed their reading skills, changed their spelling skills, then it showed that their reading skills now had the same activity on the left as the person who did not have dyslexia. So it goes back to that same aspect of the principle of experience-dependent neuroplasticity. is when you gave these children the right instruction. It's a peer-reviewed, evidence-based, proven instruction program. It's not Orton Gillingham program. So I'm just going to say that really bluntly because there's no large-scale empirical studies that show OG phonics programs are highly effective. That's part of the reason why they take 3 to 7 years to show some functional gain. But other studies have shown that when you do a speech-to-print program, which means auditory, tactile, motor, phonological processing first, sounds with letters, phonics second, then you start to see the brain rebuild these skills and the activity pattern shifts. And now the child with dyslexia, their brain begins to look just like the person who didn't have dyslexia. And I'm going to read the title of the study because this study got just a lot of complex feedback about it because they chose to name this paper Dyslexia Specific Brain Activation Profile Becomes Normal Following Successful Remedial Training. Many people don't like that word normal, and I agree with them. That normal versus abnormal, that's not the right dichotomy. It's not that the brain activity became normal, but the brain activity and the skills now are at the same level, and the child had the reading skills, and their activity pattern looked just like a kid who had never struggled to read. That's rock solid evidence that you have the ability to rewire the brain at any age when it's even a dyslexic brain.
So from a layman's point of view, I don't necessarily have an issue with the normal tag or label, because you got to look at going into a classroom. What is everybody else getting? To me, that is normal. That's what are you being delivered? And if the majority, or what is it, 36% of all the students are just going to learn to read without any help, I believe that was the number, right? 30 something percent. And then you have the dyslexic children who, no matter how much extra, actual just teaching, extra tutoring, one-on-one, going home and, your parents helping you, your sister helping you, no matter how much of that you get, the skills are never built. So saying normal to me is perfectly okay. And that really pulls into the question that we have here, which is, because dyslexia is neurologically based, is it possible to get Medicaid or an insurance company to cover treatment for adults and dyslexics?
And they're probably in California, because in California they call Medicaid Medi-Cal, which basically means government assistance for children with low-income families. And Polygon's question is spot on, because you're absolutely right. Dyslexia is rock solid proven to be a neurological difference in how the brain is processing information. Speech information becomes more problematic before reading and spelling, and the speech processing that speech therapists and neuropsychologists and psychologists call phonological awareness, that's the predictor of your reading skills. But yet somehow we allow the insurance companies to claim that it's an educational problem. But we have more neurological evidence of dyslexia's causal factors being inefficient wiring in that language cortex, leading to poor and weaker phonological processing, than we have for autism. But yet we're covering services for autism, but we're not covering services for dyslexia. And my number one guess is going to be the insurance companies don't want to cover it because it's somewhere between 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 people. There'd be a massive number of people that they would have to pay for services for. And that's unfortunate, because Polygon is right. It needs to be covered. And I think the way we're going to get it covered is more people demanding it, more people pushing for it, because that's actually how autism got coverage. So many people advocated for it, and they spoke to their legislature, and they worked with different parent organization groups to advocate to their legislator. And Stephen, you've been to Washington, D.C., and you've been to the Dyslexia Caucus. You've advocated for these kind of things as well. Those are the ways we get systematic change. But we also could actually be doing a lot more at the prevention level. In our group at the Morris Center and the Now Programs Company, we did a 5-year study on prevention of dyslexia. And it's not the genetics. We're not doing gene therapy. It's, can you prevent the reading struggles? And in that study, took us 5 years. It's a big $1 million study. We showed that we could actually have more than 91 and as high as 97% of kids reading on grade level if you used a tested, proven speech-to-print dyslexia program like that nowprograms.com offers, and you used it at age 5. So we know how to get in there and do early intervention, but we're struggling to get the educational system to buy into the concept of programs are just as important as the educator's knowledge base. And you want both to be equally strong. You want a program that's been tested, and you want an educator that's highly knowledgeable of dyslexia and how to teach reading. It's like saying in pediatrics, we want pediatricians to know a lot about diseases and disease processes and strep throat, but we also want them to have penicillin because we don't want them all randomly mixing chemicals to hope they make penicillin. That's going to put children at unnecessary risk and going to lead to more harm. So it's building both pieces together. That's how we get change and building a better educational system early.
So I will add to this, and this is one of the reasons why I try to combat these myths and just not these myths that we're talking about today, because they are so harmful to us. And I mean, I wish people would sit back and think about, okay, well, if we're saying that all dyslexics are going to be entrepreneurs and they're great artists and they're going to be, professional athletes and they're going to be all of these things, and dyslexia is not a disability and it's not a this and it's not a that. I guess my question back to you is, why would an insurance company or the government try to pay for remediation if it's none of those things?
Right.
If you're going to be just fine, then why would I provide any services for you? And I know that's kind of a smart alecky type question back to them, but I really want them to think about that.
Right.
Yes, we do need that support. Yes, we do need that help. And because we have ultimately turned over remediation for dyslexia to the school system, while typically they don't do a good job in that area, you try to take that away from them, and man, we are in for a heck of a
battle. Yeah. And understandably so, professions like to have control of what the profession is doing. But dyslexia is not an educational problem per se. It's more of a, how do you actually help build the wiring for what's a neurodevelopmental difficulty? Neurodevelopmental difficulties are not educational problems. They're brain processing problems. And brain processing problems are better handled by the brain healthcare professionals. OT is a brain science profession. Speech pathology is a brain science profession. So there's other ways we can have education partnering with the other professions to get these interventions in early, because like Van just mentions there, social acceptance is hugely difficult for him, which means many people just misjudge, most likely, him for having dyslexia, and they equate, if it's a poor speaking skills, or they see he can't spell well, or they see that you and I make a reading mistake, they equate that with our intelligence. And it's completely not true. Our intelligence is not directly tied to our reading skills, spelling skills, or speaking skills. But societal-wise, in social situations, commonly people perceive it that way, and they're going to then actually going to try to just not try to communicate with you quite as much because your skills or your knowledge isn't quite on par. And so then they're thinking you're not as knowledgeable, you're not as ability to communicate. But dyslexic people have brilliant ideas, but some of dyslexic people also have language disorders. So they actually do struggle to put thoughts down. And so Polygon, she's going to do, or he's going to do what they can. Sorry, I can't see the photo, so I'm not sure if it's a man or woman, but we'll just say it's a person.
It looks like a great name.
All right. Can't see the picture at all. They're going to try to help get things covered as an adult and keep us posted. Now, Stephen, I'm going to try something I haven't done on this platform before. Let me quickly just try to do a screen share and see if it'll let me show this article. And here it is right here. Looks like it's going to work. Yeah, here's the article I was talking about. Dyslexia-specific brain activation profile becomes normal following successful remedial training. That means They took 8 kids who had dyslexia. They put them through a high intensity speech to print, very structured speech processing before phonics program. And then they measured their brain activity before and after, and they compared it to kids who did not have reading problems. And again, what we said earlier, the kids who did not have reading problems had more activity on the left side of the brain. And that's what these brains look like. These are brains of kids, and you see large activity here on the left. Number 9, large activity in the left in that first column for number 10. There's large activity over here on number 11, more so than on the other side, which is the right. And these kids up here, these are the dyslexic kids. And you look down that first column right here, when you see going down that first column is most of them don't have a lot of activity on the left side before the intervention. Now this one does, but he's still dyslexic. This one has some, but still dyslexic. And that's why down here it says before intervention. Over here in the next column, down below here, it says after intervention. We now see that the majority of these kids all have a lot more activity on the left side, and that went along with them also showing markedly better performance on reading testing, and they no longer struggled to read and spell. So that's why we call it successful remediation of the dyslexia led to equal brain activity profiles. And so when we say that, hey, there's solid evidence that you can actually rewire the brain and change the brain, that's one of the first studies that showed this back in 2002. So we've known for more than 20 years that anybody with dyslexia has the potential to build stronger networks on the left side and build stronger processing. Sure, they might have these 6 skills: visualizing, imagining, communicating, reasoning, connecting, exploring, but they may not. And there's no research that shows people without dyslexia don't have those skills. So the real superpower, like I like to say, the real superpower is not dyslexia. The real superpower is the human brain. This organ has tremendous potential to wire, rewire, build new connections, strengthen the connections from the front to the back, reasoning to visual, and from the side over to the visual, or the side up to the reasoning. Potential to make all kinds of new changes, build new wiring. But it only happens when you give high quality practice and instruction with high intensity and high frequency of enough duration to build those skills. It's kind of like saying, if you got one bike riding lesson and then we put you in Tour de France, you're probably not going to do so well. You have not had enough instruction. You have not had enough practice to compete against these people who are experts in bike riding. So, and it's not because their brain's different than yours. Their brain just had more practice of the right intensity, of the right frequency, and the right, quote, specificity and a developmental hierarchy, and for a long enough duration. Then it puts the pieces together.
To bring this down to layman's terms, Dr. and for people that don't know Dr. Conway, he is into muscle cars. Loves old muscle cars.
Yeah, American muscle cars. A lot of fun.
What kind of car is it that you're restoring or is getting restored?
68.5 428 Cobra Jet Mustang, one of 200 that one of my family members has and is putting it together for us. Yeah.
So we take this this muscle car and we put it on the starting line. Mm-hmm. However, I walk up to the car, pop the hood, and I pull off spark plugs on 1, 3, and 5.
Yeah.
Shut the hood and then tell you to go make your lap. How do you think that car is going to run?
Yeah. You're now not firing on all cylinders. The design of the engine and for the power it's supposed to give is no longer going to be able to deliver that level of power because you've altered how the engine's operating. And that's why I like to tell many kids, look, dyslexia is genetic, blame your mom and dad. You got it from them. They can blame grandma and grandpa. But you actually are testing out as average or above average IQ. Thank your mom and dad, because IQ is genetic. But right now you've got this Ferrari brain, but it's not firing on all cylinders. It's not getting high octane fuel. It's not getting the nutrients it needs to build the neurotransmitters and the networks and how the pieces go together. So we've got to then help you get that brain tune-up per se, because we have rock solid scientific evidence that these skills can be changed.
So that's, I want people to understand that and you hear this all the time, which is, my kid has dyslexia, but they're so smart.
Right.
I know they're smart. I know they're brilliant. But that's the analogy that we're talking about here. They had this cobra sitting there on the start line, ready to go, but the wires may be off a little bit on the distributor for the spark plugs. So all of our cylinders aren't hitting. Yeah. So what we're going to do in remediation is we're going to make sure that we bring all of those weaknesses, those deficits, up to the strength. And now you've got the motor that was built for you, and you can be the best version of yourself, and that the best version that you can be. Because I haven't met a dyslexic that truly thought, unless there was a lot of other things going on, that I'm so stupid, I am never going to be able to do anything. Yeah. In the back of their mind, they know that they have a lot of intelligence and they can do and be more.
100%.
Where it comes for the social emotional piece is it's that constant failure with never success.
Yeah.
So that's the piece that I want people the messaging I want people to go out with. We need to be making sure that we are bringing those deficits, and they're deficits, let's call it what it is. Bring those deficits up to the level of your strengths. Yeah. And now that's the true superpower, right? You're not going to lose. If you're a great artist and you're dyslexic, guess what? If you're taught to read, you're remediated, and you're remediated for spelling, you're not going to lose your artistic ability. So don't think by getting help, you're going to lose any skills that you have learned to compensate with.
Absolutely. And I think, Stephen, you're a great example of that. And think about this, and I'm going to come back to you, which is, what skills did you lose when we changed your reading skills? What creativity did you lose? What reasoning skills did you lose? What problem-solving skills did you lose? Because here's another screen share. This is a study that we published, and this study was with 8 to 10-year-olds who are severely dyslexic. And so we published this study where we took these kids and gave them 80 sessions one-on-one with a speech-to-print program from that Now Programs company, which is nowprograms.com. And here's the data, and tell me, does it look like their skills got any better? These kids came in reading at the 5th percentile on ability to sound words out. And in only 80 sessions, which we did in 8 weeks, because we gave them 2 hours a day, 5 days a week of high intensity Now Foundations or Now Programs instruction, and they made it all the way up to the 45th percentile in the ability to sound out words. Now, if you really change brain wiring, and if you really change brain function, then when you take away the training supports that you did, the skills should either stay the same or even get stronger. And this is the data point for these kids when they're 1 year later. They're seriously at the same level, and they're still in the average range for reading ability to sound words out. And 1 year later, their skills are even stronger. And then when we look at their skills, just in how well do they actually change in reading comprehension, here's the same kids looking at their reading comprehension skills. Here's 16 months of special ed. And if folks don't know this, there's not current updated data, but back about 10 years ago, they reported the success rate of special ed is about 5%. About 95% of kids who got an IEP and got into special ed, 95% of them never left special ed. That means their remediation never really fully changed their literacy skills. And that's certainly what these kids are showing here. When you're in special ed for 16 months and you come in reading about the 10th percentile, and 16 months later, you're still reading comprehensions at the 10th percentile, but then we put them in that Now Foundations program and brought their reading skills up to the 30th percentile, just below grade level. 1 year later, they're on grade level. 2 years later, they're above grade level. And at 1 year tier, we weren't doing any more instruction. And in this study, it wasn't 5% of kids who left special ed. It was 40% of kids. That's what it says down here at the bottom. 40% of these kids left special ed. So now come back to you and say, okay, well then what happened when we changed your skills at age 45? What skills did you lose? What creativity did you lose? or did it enhance your creativity in some way to not struggle to read and spell?
I lost my sense of humor. No, no. I mean, honestly, it's kind of funny, running or being on Empower Dyslexia. I had a lot of people coming to me and going, "Hey, I can tell just in your communication, in your speech, a difference from before I started remediation to current." I don't know of any quote unquote skill that I lost.
Right.
However, I tend to explain it this way to people because I like to use analogies and I like to dumb it down to my level, right? So, and I heard this analogy from a great friend of mine who talked about, think about your mind as having buckets of memory. And I equate this because it equates to computers, right? So you have memory in your computer. And the memory in your computer that actually has allowed your computer to process stuff
right.
is the RAM. The
Yeah.
RAM is volatile, meaning if you turn the computer off,
Yeah,
it erases. Right. So let's think about your brain as having 10 buckets of memory. And we'll just use that number for numbers. Well, that 10 buckets of memory is there to do all the processing that your brain is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So let's add in where you start filling up these buckets. We're going to add in dyslexia. And we're going to say dyslexia will take up 6 buckets of that memory, where you can't put anything else in those buckets. So now you're only working with 4 buckets of memory.
Right.
Well, now let's add ADHD on top of that. And it then takes up 3 buckets of memory. Well, now we're only using or only have available to us 1 bucket of memory. So what we're doing with remediation is we're emptying those buckets.
Yeah.
We're turning the computer off. We're wiping that volatile memory, right? So we're able at that point to empty them and give us more processing speed and processing power to do all of the things that we couldn't do before. And we're able to do them more efficiently. We're able to do them at a faster pace because we're not sitting there struggling to sound out CAT. So the more, and I challenge our listeners to think about this. We hear all the time, the more you do, the better you get. You get better with practice, right? Well, you have to have the skill first to be able to practice it. So I could take a child that has no reading skills and is dyslexic, hand them a book, and they can sit there and look at that book till they're 45 years old, and they're still never going to be able to read.
Yeah.
So what we do is we're building those skills. So we start at the very beginning, and we start looking at your phonemic awareness. Then we go into phonics. Then we go into small words, single syllable words, multi-syllable words. Then we're going into actually reading sentences, paragraphs, so on and so forth. And the more you read, the better you get at that point. Why? Because you've built those skills, those underlining skills for reading.
Yeah.
So again, back to your original question, is there any skills that you lost? Well, you know what? I will say that there is. Guessing at how to spell words, and running away from reading.
Yeah. Which would be seen as not advantageous behaviors, not beneficial behaviors, but compensatory things you'd learn to do to deal with the struggle and the frustration. Let's jump to Trey's question, Stephen, because Trey's on the website and he's asking from the nowprograms.com website. There's pricing there for one-on-one services for one instructor to 2 kids. and even one instructor to 4 kids at $30 an hour or $50 an hour, 85. We've got some of the lowest price points in the nation because they're highly effective. And so he's asking, is, a pair of kids as effective as, one-on-one? And let me show another quick screen share. And what I want to tell Trey is, see this image here? All of these kids in this image, all of these kids are dyslexic. They're all in a school for kids with dyslexia. It's called the Einstein School. It's in Gainesville, Florida. I'm one of the co-founders of the school. It's free. Nobody pays money to go to that school. And they're all dyslexic, and they're getting one teacher per 6 kids. And they're smiling because all of them are getting stronger in their reading skills. So online, we've gone to 1-to-1, 1-to-2, and 1-to-3 or 4, because we've already proven that we can do 1-to-6. Yes, it might take a little bit longer. It might not, certainly would not be done as fast as the 1-to-1, but it's still going to be effective, and it's a way to actually save families some money over time, because then we're able to still get the skills in place without taking as many hours. It's not going to take twice as many hours, but because you're paying $35 or even $55 an hour less, taking less than the total number of hours or a little bit more than that one-on-one hours is still going to be a significant cost savings. So the goal was make that price point fit for many, many families. But let me show one other screen. And this one is what we've just released. It's right now in the beta version. We love for members to try it out. And this is right now, we've released our first app that's built on the science of the programs that we've been providing to kids with dyslexia. And we've been providing these dyslexia programs since 1986 at a clinic called the Morris Center, or the morriscenter.com. So the Morris Center and the Now Company have partnered together, and we built an app called Dipletterland. It's in the Apple Store. It's free for you to try right now because we're still beta testing, tweaking a few things. It's designed for kids age 4, 5, and 6 as an early intervention, early enrichment, quote, also called how do you help prevent struggles with reading. But what's so neat about this is because the app is taking them through the activities that we think the typical reader does automatically, it can be used as enrichment for kids to make sure they're stronger, as well as it can be used for early intervention to close the gap in kids who are struggling. So both are possible. And I throw this up there too because Colin asked, do we have a program to train teachers? Well, using things like this app is going to make it a lot more feasible for us to be able to train teachers because the app will help do part of the instruction and part of the training. Right now, most of our programs with schools are the Now Programs company partners with the school, and we push in really high fidelity instruction that the schools can't match. Our instructors have hundreds of hours of training. They're monitored by a quality control team. And so it's actually less expensive for the schools to partner with us. And we push that in there and help build the skills. And then the kids are done and we don't need to do continued intervention. The schools are typically doing year after year after year after year, hoping that they make a little bit more progress, but the fidelity is not there and the power of the program is not there as well. So to answer Colin's question, we used to do teacher training. We found the schools could not support high fidelity instruction over time. So it was way more expensive for the schools to have to keep retraining the next teacher when the first one left. And then now that one leaves and they got to train more teachers. So they never quite got to a high caliber of instruction in the schools, but we can do that with the schools today having funding for what they call high intensity tutoring. So if you want your schools to have high intensity tutoring from the nowprograms.com company, tell your school about us. We have a whole K through 12 education division in the company, and we'll work with figuring out how to help the schools fund the training for kids in your school itself. And then you got a better chance for better outcomes. Now, Stephen, you got one more question here from Sonia asking about Barton, and her son's 14 years old and he's at level 5. Well, we know that Barton is another OG-based program. And we know that the OG-based programs are actually what we call print down to speech processing. Those programs have been shown to be less effective than the developmentally appropriate phonological speech processing first, letters and phonics later. because
So
a good reader
let me
does.
ask you a quick question on that. So in layman's terms, why is it more important to go speech to print than print to speech? Because obviously they've done some, you know, I'm not going to say they haven't done any research, or you know, we can get into a whole argument about what research is and what it's not, and what's good research, what's bad research, and what success is and what it's not. Why is it so vitally important for us to go speech to letters?
Probably, again, best way I can show that, maybe I'm just on the screen presentation kick today, but easiest way I can show that is with a graph, this figure. And let me make it zoom in here so we can better see it. This is a developmental hierarchy of the brain and how it builds skills. And we know that the brain builds these phonological skills right after birth. You're talking to your kid, and that is that speech processing. They're listening to the sounds of their language. And that's building this left side that we call speaking skills or expressive language. It's also supporting the growth of this other language skill on the right side, which is your listening, your perceiving of sounds. And initially, it's all sounds with no meaning. They're hearing ba and ga and da, and they're hearing the mom going, say mama, and the dad's going, no, say dad. And they're giving them all the sounds and the mouth movements. And then later on, they start to learn the meaning of words. And then later on, they start to learn how to put words together with listening for receptive and for that expressive. And then comes order of words and spoken skills. But notice that all these bottom blocks are all speaking skills. The brain always builds speaking skills first, reading skills come later on. And in the US, it's like around 5 years of age. In the Netherlands and other countries, it's not till age 7 do they learn the written language skills. And reading is easier than spelling. So it comes on board first, then comes spelling. Those two are easier than writing. It comes last. And that foreign language that some of us really struggle with, that is the last one that we build, which is math. And then we've now really fully built the metalinguistics. Now that you've got better speaking skills, better listening skills, reading, spelling, math, writing skills, you now have the better ability to use language to think, reason, and problem solve. And hopefully we've also built these imagery skills like some folks have done really well with in their dyslexia when they couldn't read and they sat in class and made movies all day long. And they practiced making movies so much they became experts in movie making in their brain. And that's that skill that they've built because they practiced it, not because dyslexia genetically endows you with strengths without any practice. The human brain does not build skills without practice. And one thing I want to help clarify is many families and many other professionals are saying things to parents like, well, you know, the brain's not hardwired for reading and spelling skills. You have to learn that. Well, I hate to tell you, it's not hardwired for speaking either. If nobody speaks to an infant, guess what? That infant never learns how to talk. So we can have all these arguments about is reading and spelling an evolutionary later skill. Bottom line is, we just want to be sure kids can read and spell. Whether it's evolutionary or not is irrelevant from the context of the human brain builds skills in one way. It's experience-dependent plasticity.
Well, so, I mean, the way to destroy the argument about is the brain, is that a skill that we were born with or not? I mean, print is really new.
Yes.
To the humans.
Right.
I mean,
it's part of visual processing. It's part of that visual memory system, visual recognition system, which then maps to the speech system. Because I love to ask people this one question, Stephen. Why does the letter B say ba? Why doesn't it say duh? And some people actually think it says duh because many dyslexics mix up B's and D's. Why does it not say A? Why does the letter B not say ooh? And the reason is there is no reason. It's just we have this abstract visual symbol we call a letter that you have to learn to map to the speech sounds. But if you struggle to perceive the speech sound, you struggle to split a word apart, and you struggle to tell did you add a sound, take away, substitute, shift, or repeat a sound when you're speaking, and you make speech mistakes. You say, I want to be pacifically clear, which is not right. You should be saying, I want to be specifically clear. Or you say, I want to talk about this underlining principle. Well, underlining is what you do with a pen. They meant to say underlying principle. And they added an in there and changed the word. And when you can't perceive that you've made those mistakes in speech, you're more likely to not have the skills necessary to be able to sound out words to read or sound out words to spell. We have decades of research showing speech processing always comes first. The literacy skills come second, but you must have a strong speech phonological processor to get the best chance to build those literacy skills.
100%. I mean, going back to if we look at the evolution of humans, there was only a certain subset of people in any society that could actually spell, write, and read. So it's, as far as reading to the masses, I mean, it's the 1800s is when the printing press was developed, right?
Yeah.
So mass books to everybody is relatively new for us.
Right.
But guess what? What else was written about or discovered in the 1800s? Anybody listening? Do they want to guess what was found out, written about, discovered in 1881? Anyone? Dyslexia.
Yeah.
That's when it was first written about, is in 1881. It was actually earlier than that, but it was coined word blindness. And that's where dyslexia is a vision problem piece started, because it was first, I don't want to say discovered, but first written about by an ophthalmologist, because he couldn't understand why there were people that some could read and some couldn't. So surely it's got to be an eye thing, because they didn't understand about the neurology of the brain and how reading actually develops. So the point to me asking about why is it so important, it's so important because that's the way that your brain develops. We are incredibly designed.
Yeah.
Why are we going to go try to reinvent how our brain learns? It does it in order for a reason.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to go back, and if we have to remediate it in that way. And the reason why you go back to the very beginning, even if you know 60-80% of your sounds and letters, if you keep moving forward at that point, now we start doing what I call building splintered skills.
Right.
Because we have not made sure that the foundation is fully cured before we start building the house.
Yep. That concrete's got to be level, got to be solid. Otherwise, it affects every level of the house that you build. And I think, Stephen, we've really, with that model of the developmental building blocks of language, hopefully made that really clear to folks today. We're running late because you and I are just so passionate about making sure people know the difference between compensatory skills, programs that are going to be less effective, like the phonics programs. They're important, but they aren't the actual most effective programs for building those speech processing skills before the reading skills and giving them the better outcomes. And so we encourage people. We have other podcasts. We have other YouTube channels. We have other resources available for you. I have a TED Talk about the science behind it. We've got a YouTube video that reviews all the detail of the research extensively. And we have all kinds of staff that are available to answer questions through that nowprograms.com website. You just click a link of free consultation. We give hundreds of hours of consultations to parents to help them understand what are the pros and cons of the services you're getting, what are the best options at this point in time, why, what's the science behind it, and not my staff or mine or Stephen's opinion, but what's the peer-reviewed $1 million research studies that we conducted and others have conducted that tell us what's the best options going forward. So I think we're going to wrap it up. Closing comments on your side, Stephen?
I would ask that the listeners ask this question. when you're talking to people about dyslexia remediation. I want you to, whether it's the school or it's a private individual that's providing the services or whatever, I want you to ask this really simple question, which is, what does success look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because success could look different from me, from Dr. Conway, from, little Johnny down the street. And if that success measure from the person that you're getting those services from doesn't match your definition of success, I would strongly suggest that you do more research and or go find something else to do the remediation.
100%.
That's the number one question. And right after you ask that, you ask, where's your research behind what you're saying? So
Absolutely.
the last thing I would say is, if you suspect that your child is struggling, you suspect a learning disability, right off the top, do not wait. Go get testing. Go find out what's going on, so then you have a better idea of what steps you need to go take moving forward.
And I'm going to put one more post on the social media platforms, and it's a perfect example to wrap up what you just said. Is this is a video, a 90-second video. Go watch this video on that link we just put on all the Facebook platforms and Instagram. Go into those platforms, click on that link on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see what success looks like when you take a person from the 5th percentile in reading skills up to the 45th percentile. The demeanor changes, the self-esteem changes. You have unlocked those literacy skills. And then, sure, now, if they haven't built any of these superpowers that some people think lots of dyslexics have, they have a better chance to do it, because now they're not going to struggle to read. They're not going to struggle to spell. And they're going to be able to engage in more of those cognitive activities of reasoning, problem solving, visualizing, all the pieces together. So we'll be back next Friday, not for a dyslexia discussion, but next Friday is another dyslexia success story of somebody like Stephen or like myself who already has remediated dyslexia and what that's looked like. And some of these folks we're bringing online to talk with you are 5 years out, 8 years out, 20 years out since they had an empowering program like nowprograms.com or the morecenter.com to really strengthen their skills and abilities. We have lots of ways to get these resources to you all over the world. We have lots of different price points. We have lots of ways to partner with funding agencies like schools. Our goal is to empower as many dyslexics as possible so then they can go build whatever strengths they want and whatever content they want, because this brain, that's the superpower. Not these 5 things, 4 things, or 3 things about dyslexia. The whole brain, when it's really firing on all cylinders, it has amazing potential to build more skills. Stephen, thanks a ton for all the great discussion. Everyone, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for another dyslexia discussion, and we'll see you next Friday at noon for another Dyslexia Success Stories podcast. Everyone have a great weekend, and keep empowering that brain and learning more. Take care.
Take care.